a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello. So at the end of Liverpool's beating of Spurs, we're back with you. Yet another quick turnaround pod as this season of rapid game week transitions continues. The whole gang's with this evening. First up, Nick, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, thanks. Yeah, it is, as you said, it's really non-stop football right now, isn't it? And certainly helping, I guess, with the dry January and lockdown where there's nothing else to do other than work, eat, watch football, and continue to grow my beard. Of course, we are Who Got the Assist. Make sure to join our league if you haven't already. The league code is CPSULF. Also joined by Anthony. How are you doing?
Hi lads, how are you getting on? Good to be back again and good to have another game week down. We have a quick fire pod this week because unlike last pod where we had a chance to actually digest things, we're yet again back to that rapid turnover. So first of all, this pod is going to be led by correspondence. For the first time, the versatile section finally becomes the market leader in the Who Got the Assist spectrum. Tom is loving it. We'll also be answering some of the other questions that have come in from you guys on the issues of the day. However, as per normal, we are going to start with the game reviews and market forces.
Yep, and it's an unfamiliar face acting as the bottom feeder this week, isn't it, Nick? After quite a difficult game week for yourself, and quite a you said saying it was a bit of a fall from grace, weren't you, before we got on?
It's not good. I mean, it's only a tiny red arrow, to be fair. All in all, I think I'm still just reeling from the damage from the previous week, and I was hoping for a little bit of a boost, but it's not happened. So I did get 52 points, but also took a hit, which takes me down to 48. So yeah, red arrow down about sort of 10k or something in total. So not a huge red arrow, but still red arrow nonetheless. I mean, it started off pretty well. Soucek getting a brace, that was pretty exciting. Yeah, that was great. And then with the triple city, it was a bit of a roller coaster game because I had Sterling, Stones, and Diaz. So when the halls of Cancelo, Gundogan came in, I was feeling quite glum, but then Sterling at least got a goal and assist in the second half, and I got clean sheets from Diaz and Stones, which definitely helped bring my rank up a little bit. But apart from that, after that, it was just rubbish. Everyone else blanked in the team, basically. Adams blanked, Dallas, Martinez in goal, and Fernandez, the captain, also blanked. And then in tonight's game, Kane got subbed off at half time, had an assist ruled out, Salah had the goal ruled out, and Robertson got nothing. It was Trent's night instead. So all in all, yeah, not great. But I know a couple of you guys are catching up with me now, aren't they?
I'm not, but I still had a good game week. I went from 720k to about 550-ish k. I got a 68 -8. So the -8 was to remove Kevin De Bruyne, was to remove Kilman. Finally, the turd which would not flush was flushed. Plunger was out and everything, but I finally got rid of him. And Jamal Lewis, and in came Ruben Diaz, Stones, and Gundogan, and that went pretty well. 68 -8. Key performances from the aforementioned Gundogan with the 14. Out of nowhere, actually, that guy just became Kevin De Bruyne, except worth 5.5. Incredible. Except one who is an elite finisher. The first game, though, was great. Thomas Soucek for the 15, and also big Mike Dawson, otherwise known as Craig, got the 9-pointer. Elsewhere, the likes of Grealish did the business. There was obviously the ubiquitous Captain Blank for everybody except those who were ballsy enough to go out with a Cancelo captaincy on Bruno Fernandes. But I mean, yes, 60 points. It sounds like that was quite a good one this week, and certainly in terms of how I've gotten away with quite a hefty green arrow according to live rank. So I can't be unhappy with that. And it looks like a fairly obvious transfer's opened itself up because I've still got Vardy to get rid of. And with Kane, who was going to come in, now looking injured, there's only one way to go. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. At the top of the pile, Anthony, well, you're definitely catching up to Nick now, aren't you?
It's live FPL is showing it as 10 points, which is much closer than it used to be, which is nice to see. But I guess this game week was quite good, but could have been better. And I know this is like a hashtag points scenario, but bear with me because I have Soucek benched, and yet I still managed to get 67 points. Thanks basically to loads of people or loads of players that were under 7 million. So I had the Cancelo 17 points, the Diaz 6, Gundogan there with 14 points, and Saka as well in midfield with 13. Ollie Watkins obviously getting in with a goal as well for 6 points, and then just a bunch of ones and twos, and the Bruno Fernandes captain in on that. So like that's really good on paper, but it is kind of one of those ones where you're looking at Soucek there on the bench and wondering, oh, did I make? Did
Yeah.
I make? I was happy with my decision. If you get me, like I wasn't sitting there going, "Oh, I've made a great mistake" when the deadline passed, and I
Yeah.
played the likes of Dallas and Soufal ahead of him. But of course, like within seconds, West Ham had the clean sheet left out, and within even a few more minutes, really, Soucek had his brace, and it all felt like a bit of a disaster, and it did go up from there. So now I'm at my rank going into this game week was 269k. Post auto subs, it looks like it's going to be 162k. So things are coming together, but you need to grab the breaks when they come your way. And I feel like whilst I've obviously done quite well here, I need to grab the breaks bigger when they are coming my way. I had the components in my side to have an absolutely huge week, and I missed that, and that's a bit frustrating. But I can't complain overall.
Yeah, I think the but game weeks are always the hardest, aren't they? I think you were probably the only man on Twitter campaigning for Kane and Son to be injured and not
honestly,
play the game.
I'd have been so delighted if the Liverpool Spurs match was just called off. Like it would have been just like, oh yeah. I was genuinely there. I was searching through Twitter, like Kane injury, just like trying to find something to grab onto for the last 2 days. And there was someone in some Tottenham forum was trolling by retweeting something from the 20th of January last year where Kane was injured, and briefly my heart skipped a beat where I thought yes, and then no, 2020, not 2021. So it's been a bit of a roller
him then,
coaster.
by the sounds of things.
Yeah. Maybe I did curse him, but at least I've made my transfer easier for this week. So
thanks for that one.
No problem. Yeah, I've taken Spurs off the title charge just as United have gone off theirs as well. It's been a real tough few days.
Devastating.
Exactly. Well, speaking of making transfers easier, Nick, what are people doing in the transfer market, in the market forces?
So it's been pretty busy again in the market forces. I guess it's all about the City boys, isn't it? So firstly, we've got Gundogan, which is he's being bought almost as quickly as shares in GameStop with 260,000 transfers in so far, except there is a little bit of underlying value here. He's obviously got 7 goals in 8 games, breaking his record for a single season. Only costs 5.6 million. Looks like an absolute steal at the moment. Otherwise, his teammate Cancelo, another player, as Stag alluded to, completely bossed it this week with a goal, assist, and clean sheet, which is the holy trinity of FPL returns. He's had 180,000 transfers in so far. And also Stones getting quite a lot of attention with 90,000 transfers in. No brace this week, but yet another clean sheet. That's now 9 clean sheets in 11 games for him this season, which is just a phenomenal record. He's only conceded 2 goals on the pitch this season, probably saving all his mistakes for the Euros in the summer, no doubt. But having a ridiculously good season for Stones. Otherwise, DCL as well, another player heavily being bought at the moment, also 90,000 transfers in. Obviously, we've got some questions on Everton a little bit later, so we'll talk about him a little bit later. And then there's Kane. So a few people breaking the Austin rule here, really, because he's 5th on the market forces at the moment with 85,000 transfers in, which is just, I think a few people are going to get punished there because obviously he came off at half-time. Probably moved a quick turnaround. He's probably not going to be fit for the next game. Have to wait and see. But yeah, looking like a dodgy move, that one.
Yeah, a bit of an unfortunate one. But I guess like breaking the Austin rule, at this point in what has already been a pretty turbulent season, kind of seems like something that really should be avoided if at all possible. So not to say, one of those kind of they deserve it, but at the same time, it's kind of it's a tough one for those owners. In terms of players being sold, then really it's 2 strikers that are leading the charge in that sense. It's Bamford and Vardy being most sold, probably soon to be joined by Kane, as you allude to. Kevin De Bruyne then being the 3rd most sold. All kind of sensible transfers with people just trying to clean up value, basically.
Yeah, probably a lot of people having done that Vardy to Kane switch and now going to have to transfer out yet another injured player. So yeah, bit of craziness in the market this week. But we'll move on then to correspondence, shall we? So Anthony, who's written in this week?
So yeah, we've actually got our first ever corresponder is our first ever person to be mentioned twice in correspondence, and it's desperately seeking Dusana, friend of the show, and he's written in with a follow-up on the relationship between pricing and benching, which is something that's kind of been alluded to by us recently, but is something which has definitely been coming up in the FPL community after the many people like myself benching Soucek over the weekend. So Alan has basically pointed out a few tweets to us where people were kind of talking about how if Soucek was an 8 million player, would we ever have considered benching him? And observing generally how Soucek has been benched, most often for Robbo as far as Alan is concerned. And he's basically asking about whether we will ever be able to shake the cognitive bias that we have when it comes to team selection and picking players. Alan says, whilst there is often a focus on value, the reason many brought in Soucek, when it comes to actually starting these players over a more expensive asset, it seems difficult for many to do so, even when the more expensive player has an ostensibly more difficult fixture. The old bias that quality is associated with higher cost. If we take Robbo this week, why play him away to Spurs, which is a difficult game, over Soucek, who was playing against a side that had the third worst XGC over the last 6 game weeks? Perhaps this is hindsight, but other than the sight of a 7.4 million player on the bench feeling, quote unquote, wrong, there is no reason not to have picked Soucek. Good, succinct question, and that's pretty much it, lads. So what do you think about that and the idea of pricing benching?
So yeah, this is a hot topic issue, and I know that FPL General, for example, has mentioned this on the 59th Minute pod this week. So I'm going to give it a slightly different spin, drawing on my behavioural science past and also my professional background and what I do now for my job in terms of research, insight, and strategy in finance. Not that it matters to anybody, but anyway, what this question really touches on is something called the price quality heuristic. The idea being that we often don't know the quality of what we're purchasing without a frame of reference. That's what price does. Price assumes a huge importance alongside things like brand recognition. Herd behavior also has a bit of an important role to play. So, for example, the meme stock bubble with GameStop, as Nick alluded to earlier, playing a huge role today, an amazing example, bubbling. But price is so important because it's a perpetual cue which denotes quality, and it does so throughout the FPL season. And it's where we often fall into the pitfall of price quality heuristic, especially now, using that price as a cue for quality. In real life, we often find ourselves defaulting to big brands for a variety of reasons. For example, nebulous factors such as trust. Think about it. You're likely to own lots of goods created by bigger brands versus substitute brands such as your smartphone, which is likely to be a Samsung, an Apple phone. It's not likely to be, a brand that you've never heard of, although maybe something like OnePlus, a smartphone, may be a value brand that actually is pretty good beyond the price. It creates quality. Applying that to FPL, brand recognition is really important. It's analogous to big teams, well-known players, and it informs a lot of strategies for people who aren't particularly engaged in FPL. So think around game week 1, your less engaged friends will be saying, Man United, they're quite good, aren't they? I'll get 3 of them because I'm a fan of them. Or you'll hear, I've heard of him, he's pretty good, I'll buy him. In FPL, because players often are a bit more pricey, that means as a default of the price quality heuristic, we trust them. So we look at them and say, oh, he's got a high price tag. He must be worth it. Therefore, I'm going to get him. And it does throughout the season mean we default to these pricier players when there's better options on the table. KDB, a salient example. I was having a discussion in a group the other day, and there were those who said, KDB will always come back into my team because he's worth it. I enjoy having him in there. Fair play if you enjoy having him in there, but last season great at 9.5 million. This season 11.8 million. Really, is that worth the money? Are you not looking at the price of the player and thinking that represents quality? Another example, Mo Salah in many squads. No FPL returns since the 19th of December, that Crystal Palace game. So looking at most data points at the moment, KDB, for example, is he really worth the money? He's outscored by the likes of Soucek, Callum Wilson this season. He's equal in points with Nick Pope. There's also brilliant underlying data for him. There's no poop to go with it. Ultimately, we trust the brand of KDB, but we've been let down this year. I'm not immune to that, of course. But at some point, you've got to question if he's done enough to earn our trust. Soucek, the example that's mentioned there, is easy to say, he's low price, so he's the bencher. But the thing to get your head around now is that his quality has exceeded his price. So the price's ability to act as a guide to his quality, his value, as Nick said in the past, is no longer as valid as it was at the beginning of the season, which is now 20 game weeks ago, and it no longer applies as strongly. That means we have to use other factors than price to gauge how important a player is, how quality a player is. Stats, for example. So I pointed out on Twitter, Palace conceded the second most head chances of the season and the most for set piece over the last 4, which may have led to some 50-50 calls going towards them rather than away from them for me. So I played Soucek and Dawson this week. But yeah, the overall message, I guess, is we've got to be mindful of this price quality heuristic now in the season. Now we're so divorced from when the price were initially set There's innumerable examples, be it likes of Soucek, maybe now Gundogan this year, and in the past, likes of Todd Cantwell, likes of Josh King, the likes of Riyad Mahrez. Price ceases to be an accurate guide for quality eventually for so many players when you get to a point of the season like right now. A final kind of thing to point out, which really shows price quality heuristic in action. If Gundogan was 10 million, would he be the most captain player this weekend? I bet yes, by a landslide. So many people would captain him without really thinking about it. That really does underline how price quality heuristic really does inform and drive FPL managers' behaviours. What do you guys think about that?
As you said, we can be blinded by a player's price, but often that price is predetermined by the historical performances, and players that cost over 10 million are typically there because in the previous season they scored 200 plus points and were viable captain picks over the course of the season. They're players with significant reputations, as you know, but those reputations have been molded over the course of 3 to 4 seasons where they've got 10 plus goals, 10 plus assists. Kevin De Bruyne, obviously, last season, he was the top scoring player in the game, whilst Gundogan, he only scored about 3 or 4 goals, I think. So, in that sense, Kevin De Bruyne has the reputation. He's got the previous history to fall back on, whilst the likes of Gundogan, obviously, he's in incredible form, the best form of his career, ultimately. But he scored more in the last 7 game weeks than he's managed in an entire season before. So you have to wonder if this is just a temporary blip, whilst players like Bruno Fernandes or Mo Salah, as you alluded to, they've got that historical performance, that reputation that obviously precedes them, and we know that Salah or someone like that can turn up any day, bang a hat-trick in 35 minutes, and that's the risk obviously of players like him. But I think, obviously you made some excellent points, Anna made some excellent points as well, and I think I did look at it and I thought a little bit about captain picks as well, as you mentioned captain picks, and I remember when you saw some of these players emerge, like Harry Kane. I think this was one of my best ever FPL seasons actually, when I backed him as a Spurs fan when he first emerged on the scene. Many managers were still backing the £13 million Van Persie that season. And I think Van Persie didn't have a great season. Harry Kane was only 4.5 million, broke into the team and did massive returns and was excellent for me. And then obviously Riyad Mahrez, he's another great example of this. When he emerged on the scene, ended up being the top scorer in the game, 5.5 million. Hardly anyone captained him over the course of that season. But if you were a Leicester fan, or if you caught him early and then captained him most of that season, you'd have ended up with a sort of top 10k rank very easily. So I think, there are cases for and against. As I said, you mostly highlighted for, so I thought I'd highlight some of the cases why we back these premium players, which is based on past performance ultimately over a significant period of time. And that's part of the reason I personally went for Raheem Sterling, even though I knew that I was paying a significant more amount of money. I had it in the bank because at the moment the premiums are doing very, very badly. But this is rare for FPL. We never have this scenario where the best performing midfielders of a game week are all around 5.5 million, and all the premiums have done absolutely sod all. But that's very much the exception to the norm. We're very much used to saying the obvious captain is obvious. The premiums are premiums for reasons. These are rules we've quoted before, and I feel obviously this week's different, but most of the time they do perform.
Yeah, and I guess what definitely distinguishes now versus other periods as well is that it's not just this game week, it's multiple game weeks in a row now that the likes of Salah and Fernandes have been disappointing, and that's extremely unusual. Now, I think kind of maybe bringing what both of you guys were saying together, maybe to give my own view on this, is that, I think, Nick, how you were pointing out that there is a historical basis of most players' prices. Obviously, new players that wouldn't be into the Premier League, that wouldn't be the case, but there is a historical basis to the value that is ascribed to most players. And think, as you say as well, overall, that tends to be pretty good. Like, there are exceptions, obviously. Gundogan right now definitely falls into that category. Even Lundstrom last season, was definitely the opposite of well priced. Now, what Tom is saying about how stats are our means to value players, I think that's totally right. And I think if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably inclined to believe that anyway, that you don't necessarily get tied in just by value, but there is inherently a bias towards the more expensive players. But that's, I think, not necessarily just because of their prices and because people are tied to the fact that they've spent money on that player. It's tied to the fact that people remember what Salah did to them before, what Kane did to them before, when they didn't own him, when they didn't captain him, whatever that may be. as well, obviously, the prices, and this is kind of just an obvious point, is that pricing doesn't account for tactical changes. Pricing doesn't account for players managing to, just stay fit for long periods of time. And someone like Gundogan kind of is benefiting in both of those categories. And maybe one third aspect that we didn't consider as we were going through this was pretty much last week's topic, ownership. And I guess just, the overall ownership, the effective ownership of players. And that's perhaps why the likes of Soucek could be benched. And that's not just, it's because he's not in as many squads. Bruno Fernandes, of course, you felt like you had to captain him when his ownership was through the roof. His effective ownership was like well up over 150 or 160% this week. You almost couldn't not at your peril. Soucek, his top 10k ownership was 56.3%, but his effective ownership, because he was benched by so many players, was only 23.3%, which I guess shows you that that people have a lot of Soucek's type players in their team that they have to bench. Like I had Gundogan, I had Saka, I had Soucek. To play all three of those and to not play premiums, to not play highly owned players, and not to play players who have historically proven themselves to be brilliant over a far longer and far more consistent and far more explosive period of time than the likes of Saka, Soucek, Gundogan, meant that I felt like I almost had to bench one of them. And you could point to the fact that I played 4 defenders. Okay, fine. That's just my team's point. But in general, I think I still see why it is the likes of Soucek that get benched. And I don't think it's as simple as just a point that people are benching them because of their value. I think they're benching them for so much more than just their value. It's their history, it's their form, it's what other players have done as well.
With Soucek, it was like, oh well, I'm not going to be hurt too much materially in terms of my rank by benching him. I guess that's what you're kind of getting at there. And obviously, you wouldn't think about benching the likes of Bruno or something like that. I mean, maybe the likes of Robbo versus Soucek is more questionable, as per the question that Alan originally posed. I think that with Soucek, with the data that I unearthed before when I was doing kind of my final decisions, that would have probably meant that I would have benched Robbo for Soucek if I did have the choice. But I think it is always one of those things that it is worth really thinking about the value of the player rather than thinking about the price of the player. But eventually, as I argued, price does eventually become less and less important. It's more about what the player does over the course of the season. Because after a while, great, we have a Salah doing not very much. We have a Gundogan with no real track record. Yeah, fine. But he's got a track record for the last few weeks, and we should enjoy that while it lasts, sort of thing. The form is temporary, class is permanent. You're always going to find that these players who are the Salahs and KDB of this world probably will come back to prominence in our teams. But I think that when we do have the chance to kind of reassess, reevaluate, and maybe reassign some of our cash to gain, then we should.
But Salah isn't Rosebud. Salah is real. Do you know what I mean? Like, I kind of feel like with Salah, it's like, okay, sure, there's been a few bad weeks, and even Robbo as well, just to bring it back to a slightly more realistic option. Robbo didn't do well this week, but his effective opposite has had a pretty big week in TAA. There's a reason, I guess, why the likes of Soucek will be benched, and it's the fact that he blanked in the double game week. And people felt like they could get away with it. And I know there are stats that would have said that Crystal Palace's defense was the type of one that maybe Soucek would do well against. But the reason why he did well was nothing really to do with set pieces, as it turned out. And it's like, okay, well, there was a bit of it, but it wasn't like a direct header off a corner, I guess, is what we're getting at here. And that kind of... it just makes you kind of wonder that there is like an element of luck in this, and maybe it isn't just all tied up in value.
You're not saying FPL is related to luck in any way, shape, or
form.
Wait,
hang on. Sorry, what? No way.
I thought it was all skill. Scurrilous way to end the correspondence this week. I may cancel it after that.
Yeah. Wow. Not again. Okay, yeah. So aside from yet another existential threat to the correspondence section, that does conclude this correspondence section, just like all the rest of them, really. whogottheassist@gmail.com if you want to send any correspondence to us in the future, be that in audio form, letter form, or whatever else you might think of.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. Really good question. Really topical question as well, with so much bench angst this week. Moving on to the questions then. Obviously, we do have the hot topic questions coming up, but the first one I think is one that's worth meditating on slightly. It's unfashionable wildcards. I thought it was quite an interesting one to throw in here. So Karen Tyers have wrote in and said it's quite, he's not having the season he hoped for, and he's written in to say he's thinking of wildcarding, but it's unfashionable on social media to do so. Can we kind of talk about the pros and cons of going against the social media meta sentiment in terms of either wildcarding or other things? I mean, Nick, what do you reckon in terms of wildcarding and perhaps as well listening to kind of the herd?
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard the question, to be honest, I was kind of really thinking about this particular game week, what would drive you to wildcard, and I couldn't really see, there might be reasons for people to do it, but I couldn't really see them, to be honest. I think obviously now with Harry Kane being injured, you're probably going to see a few more wildcarders emerging. It's always something like an injury crisis to drive people to wildcard, but I think, as always, it very much depends on your team. With if you're missing out, for instance, on the triple Manchester City, then you probably need to make some transfers to get those guys in ASAP. There's a few fixture shifts, as we mentioned, the likes of Everton or Leicester coming up with some decent fixtures. And then we've obviously got the scenario currently with all the premiums who are performing badly, and then some of the cheaper assets that you could bring in and get those guys in and hope to get the points there. But as I kind of alluded to in the last question, I'm a bit nervous about that just because of the lack of pedigree from some of those assets. So it's something that I'm personally a little bit cautious in relation to wildcarding or something like that to try and chase down the likes of Saka and Gundogan. But obviously, there are very much multiple cases for why you might want to wildcard. Obviously, you get the immediate boost of having a clean, refreshed team, getting all the players you want to get in and get rid of all that deadwood. Obviously, the cons as well. We've got so many different fixtures coming up with double game weeks, all sorts of things like that we need to prepare for. We don't know the machinations at this moment in time, really. So, and in that sense, I preach caution.
And I think that certainly makes sense. I think in terms of chip deployment, it really comes down to knowing the risks effectively. I mean, obviously, there are going to be perhaps in hindsight there is going to be in hindsight perhaps time of the season when you should have perhaps played your chips. But it really is down to obviously what you do best. I know we say it a lot, but you are the manager of your own team, and excellent players like Simon March have used their wild card out of kilter with the Twitter sort of sphere. And that guy doesn't need to prove his credentials at all. And in the first half wildcard, for example, we saw people like Big Man Bakar using his wildcard in game week 2, which again I didn't really agree with. But fundamentally, it's his choice, and fundamentally, he's got the records. Why not? Look, the reality is you have your team in mind. No one else really has that. A lot of the time, people who don't have intimate knowledge of your team are trying to give you advice. A lot of the advice you get is from this perspective of somebody who, would do something completely different if it was them. An observation of mine is that managers are often advising or encouraging, really risky tactics when they themselves are quite conservative people. They always say, take the hit, go for the risky captaincy. They'll never do it in their own, in their own team. If you're an experienced manager, like Karen is, for example, you know the risks and what you have to do in terms of developing a unique strategy to deal with the end of the season. But I trust your instincts about your team, because at the end of the day, you have instant knowledge of your team. And if you feel that kind of way, that you feel like you've got to do it, and as Nick said, get that kind of short-term gain, and then you can build it from there, go for it if you're confident. But an important final point there is, I guess, don't make sure you're not overreacting to just a bad week, because if you are just doing that, you pull the wild card in vain, you could find yourself sort of out of sorts down the line. And in terms of kind of the general kind of herd thing, yeah, I mean, in hindsight, and I first accept this is hindsight, last week, Bruno Fernandes, the captaincy there were a couple of kind of effects of the fact that due to effective ownership, everybody knew he was going to be captained. We all said we were going to captain him. It made complete sense to do so. But the impacts were that due to effective ownership, whatever he did was completely irrelevant. And there were huge gains from those not captaining. For example, our friend B&M Matt Cancelo, 34 points. That is massive. I can say an example of how the ownership isn't always right. And you can make those little differences that kind of make or break your season through kind of once or twice going against kind of the established sort of hierarchy with established sort of norm for one seat for one game week per week, even if I prefer to do that in a split pin because I'm a bit of a coward these days. Anthony, what do you reckon here?
Yeah, I think you're right that especially if your season really isn't going to plan, I think breaking from the herd is probably it's possibly a route to complete disaster, but it's also your best chance at getting a ticket to a way higher rank than you currently have, rather than the kind of slow but sure maybe tick tock towards a more respectable rank that maybe you might otherwise go through. Looking at the wild card right now, I kind of just dug into the specifics a tad more, looking at it just from this perspective. Right now, for a start, we don't really know what's actually coming up in front of us. So we have a double game weeks in 24, 26, 27, and a blank in 29. The blanks for game week 29 are going to be confirmed in game week 24, which is multiple game weeks away. And the blank game week 26 doubles are probably going to be announced in game week 24, 26. This is all, by the way, through Ben Crellin. So follow him if you don't follow him already. You're probably missing out big time if you don't. But Ben has put all this together. So, okay, looking at that, there's an awful lot of info about important things to come that you don't necessarily have. Of course, there's 3 game weeks between now and double game week 24 that you could be making hay while the sun is shining, and that's fair enough too. Now, just looking at the specifics of the fixtures themselves, the fixture shift amongst, let's say, the best teams is actually against Man City in the next few weeks. They've had very good fixtures. They're getting a little bit harder, but they are, of course, Man City, and so every fixture is winnable and scoreable for them and clean sheetable. So in spite of the fact that the fixtures are shifting against them, they are also going to be supplemented by double game weeks. So no matter what you do with your wild card, you're going to be holding your double or triple City, and it's going to be staying that way. Spurs, I think you're going to be keeping at least one of them, and that's probably going to be Son, now that it looks like Kane might be injured. If you don't have Son already, you'll probably be looking to get him in. You probably still won't want to sell Bruno, and I presume he's in your side. And then, let's say the rest of your team, the nuts and bolts of it. Fixtures look okay for the likes of Palace, Villa, West Ham, Leicester. You probably have a few players from them that you won't want to sell, which means that very quickly, and also, by the way, the teams that the fixtures are turning towards, West Brom, Fulham, Man United, Chelsea, you're not going to be in a massive rush to bring in any of their players that you don't already have, maybe with the exception of Chelsea if you really want to take a risk. So it just doesn't look like the environment is really set up for someone to wildcard and to make massive gains, because I don't think that there's players that you're going to be bringing in who have particular explosivity that would give you an advantage. And I think you could do much more with your wildcard through the blanks and doubles to come by just veering off what everyone else is doing, maybe when everyone else is wildcarding, probably after game week 29 by the looks of it.
Do it your way, but definitely be conscious of those warnings that have been put out by the guys there. I guess we are at a bit of a crossroads, aren't we, at the moment? I've just seen that Harry Kane, Mourinho has said he's out for a few weeks with both ankles injured, for example. So we're really at a case at the moment where we're running out of players to own. If we're saying that, Salah is not at the race anymore, if we're saying that KDB is obviously injured, we're saying Kane's going to be out, like, what are you going to do with all that money? You're awash at the moment. It's very difficult to be saying who you're going to be bringing in and how you're going to make a team that you're going to be solid and confident in is going to make a difference for you.
But especially when you probably already have the 4s, 5s, and 6 million players. It's like that's what kills me about it, is that the wildcard maybe just to move around all those other small assets would make sense usually, but not right now.
Yeah, I think unless you are convinced, and obviously if you are feeling that way, then do it. But it feels like one of those which is a bit marginal at the moment. I guess moving on to the kinds of teams which could shake the template, even if there is a template anymore. I'm sure it's evaporated in front of our very eyes with that. Return of the Blues. So Thomas Tuchel now in charge. Which, if any, Chelsea assets are on our radar in the hope of a new manager bounce? Littlefinger FPL asked us this. Where are we looking at in terms of Chelsea? 887 passes, guys, 78.9% possession. The Athletic said that had never happened in the first game under a new manager. But are we interested in any of the Blues at the moment? Surely the case is the fact that Burnley and Spurs are watch and wait games, and then maybe we'll move afterwards. Anthony, what do you reckon there?
I think, calling the next 2 games watch and wait, I think, is probably the fairest assessment. Forwards wise, I don't think there's an obvious option. Midfielders, this isn't exactly a unique point to suggest that there's a serious rotation problem there amongst the Chelsea midfielders, and you just can't be certain about what Thomas Tuchel is going to do with his midfielders over the next few games. One would suspect that Kai Havertz will be given an important role in this side over the next few weeks, but we're yet to see enough from Kai Havertz to be super excited and to bring him in. Now, he was wonderful in the Bundesliga before he came over, has had a slow start, has had COVID, and could be worth the risk, but it feels like a bridge too far for me. And that really just leaves us with defence. And I think, to be honest, we're still looking at Ben Chilwell as the best option in that defence. And he'd be the player that I would be considering bringing in, but I won't be rushing to bring in.
I think you're right there. The problem with Chelsea at the moment is this absolute rotation nightmare. We've got no idea who's going to start week in, week out now. With obviously Tuchel, he's not going to have a firmly settled starting 11 right now. Mount was obviously benched. He was kind of Lampard's favourite, but he started on the bench, so don't know when he'll be back in the team. And likes of Havertz, as you mentioned, struggled to adjust this season. Looks like a no-go. Werner, popular pick. He didn't start and generally looked toothless. And I really like Pulisic as well, but he didn't start either. I think if I was to suggest an attacker, it would probably be Ziyech, to be honest. Despite Chelsea's lack of attacking output in that game, he was getting forward quite a lot, making a lot of runs. He actually made 10 crosses in that week, which was the most out of all players in the Premier League. That game weekend, he created 4 chances as well. And when he has played, he's created a chance every 35 minutes and had a goal attempt every 33.4 minutes as well. So I think he certainly looks like one that, if I was to recommend a Chelsea attack, he'd be the one to target. I think you're probably right, Anthony. It's the defence probably rather than the midfield or the attack that are probably worth considering. And if everyone's got a bit of surplus cash now, so to speak, then targeting the likes of Ben Chilwell, going big at the back again, could be an option. And he certainly looks the most nailed as well in terms of all the outfield stars. A few rumours lurking around that Alonso was back on the scene after Lampard had been fired, but Chilwell started the game, and he's been pretty impressive since he signed for Chelsea this year.
He played really poorly, though. I don't think you can have another appearance like that under Tuchel. I mean, that was the first game, and he was really, really bad. It's a shame, but I'm sure he's by far the best left back, so left wing back, I guess, in this case. So I'm sure that will continue. I mean, when I looked at it, I initially thought, of course, Werner, Aubameyang scored 56 goals in 63 games under him at Dortmund, but that was harpooned by the team selection. So I guess in common with you guys, defence where I turn. The first one really was Rudiger, 4.5 million, potential bargain, I think, going forward. He's the man that TT identified as the Thiago Silva replacement at PSG, which I think is probably a good sign for his ongoing involvement in that kind of backline, especially if they stick to a 3 at the back. With the wing backs, Chilwell and Cho, who was being Mosesed, were very advanced. And I had a look at fullbacks under him, especially Lucas Piszczek at Dortmund, 2015-16, 16-17. There are lots of encouraging numbers on the stat. In 2015-16, that was his most creative season ever. That was TT's first with him, 1.25 key pass per 90. And the next season, he scored his most goals to date. There's also Juan Bernat at PSG in the Tuchel's first season there. His XA numbers soared from his time at Bayern. So he was averaging 1.55 XA per season at Bayern. That went up to 3.33 per season under the German manager. So there's always these wing backs getting into kind of threatening positions, these creatively threatening positions rather than scoring goals. And the touch map shows how advanced they were. Nick mentioned Ziyech. There's also Havertz, forgotten man, but he's only 21. We shouldn't be writing him off yet. And he's got that elite reputation. 29 goals, 9 assists last 2 seasons at Leverkusen as a teenager. He's not found his feet yet. Laid low by COVID as well. And in my opinion, had a coach in Lampard who didn't know how to use him versus how he was used at Leverkusen. Now he does, probably. And I think he could potentially be a very exciting asset going forward. Maybe not this season, maybe one for next season, perhaps as the new man's methods take root. But 8.2 million next year, if he doesn't do very well this year, next year he could well come in at like 7.5. Wow, one to have a look at. But yeah, wait and see. The Athletic call him a pragmatic manager who loves to tinker. Maybe we'll see Kai Havertz be a new Mount S teacher's pet. But either way, as I said earlier, Burnley, Tottenham, they strike me as great games to assess what's going on. And we haven't really seen enough to jump in yet, unless it's really good at 4.5 billion, because that's probably worth the pump. Staying with teams in blue, James Carroll says that as a fixtures man, he can't look past Everton for the next few, plus the potential double game week 24. What do we think of this one? Quite an interesting one. And I think this is probably going to be the basis of many people's transfers this week as well, because Nick said as well already 90,000 managers at the time of recording have brought in Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Anthony, what do you reckon here?
Yeah, Tom, your segue game is on point tonight as well, I want to say. But yeah, as for the Everton players, yeah, no, it really is. No, that wasn't a pew-pew at all. Looking at the fixtures, the Everton do have maybe a good next four. I wouldn't necessarily kind of look beyond that when I was saying that they have good fixtures. So Newcastle at home, Leeds away, United away, Fulham at home. So that's okay. Now, the last, let's say, if you're looking at any of the last four, the last 6 weeks, for example, you don't see Everton attackers featuring in the top for shots or any of the other important details, in spite of the fact that they played against Sheffield United, West Ham, Leeds, and Leicester. Of course, the obvious point in this is that Dominic Calvert-Lewin missed one of those, James missed 1.5 of those, Luca Dean missed 2 of those. So there was an awful lot of important players missing. And now that the band is back together, they do look much more creative and much better, in spite of not getting a big result against Leicester. In the FA Cup against Sheffield Wednesday, they were quite good. James Rodriguez especially, 8 key passes and 2 assists, both of them off corners, and he obviously got a goal against Leicester as well from one of his 2 attempts. Calvert-Lewin obviously ended his goal drought as well against Sheffield Wednesday, which maybe makes sense more of the excitement about him in the market forces. But he only had 2 shots against Leicester, so like we're not talking about someone who's suddenly kind of getting great opportunities served on a platter. So I don't think it's a black and white thing where you definitely need to get Everton players in. But I do think that because they just have a good next 4 fixtures and the band is coming back together, I think it's a blink and you'll miss it type of chance to really jump on them and to really profit from them perhaps turning in form. And there is definitely kind of I'm going to say underlying indications to say that that might be coming, but really only based on short-term time horizons and placing a lot of emphasis on a game against Sheffield Wednesday, who are in the bottom half of the championship.
Yeah, all of the ingredients are there, aren't they? As you said, the supporting cast, they're all back together. They've not astonishingly been back together since game week 9. That was the last time he saw double digits, and game week 11 was the last time Hammers played with him as well. I love the idea of bringing him in because of that swing in the fixtures. I'm talking him means Calvert-Lewin. I've got Jamie Vardy to get rid of. It was going to be Kane who came in, and now it's definitely going to be Calvert-Lewin. I was actually going to be removing Bamford to Calvert-Lewin to take -4, but now it's out the window, and I'm probably just do the straight swap. Another thing that should probably be very interesting just for the game week to come, Newcastle. Yeah, Newcastle at the back. They've conceded the most big chances over the last 6 games. That's Calvert-Lewin territory. They've also conceded the second most headed attempts in the last 6 games. That's Calvert-Lewin territory. And they've got the second worst XGC in the last 6 games, only marginally behind West Brom. It was 0.1 XGC behind West Brom. I'm looking to bring in Calvert-Lewin 100%, and I could even captain him because it's a split pin game week with no clear captain. So I'm interested in kind of doing the perhaps frowned upon buy and captain maneuver. I've got Violet to get rid of, so it's no skin off my nose if I do it. Nick, what do you think about the Everton lot?
Yeah, I definitely think Calvert-Lewin looks like a standout pick for this week. I was struggling actually how I was going to get him into my team, how I'm going to fit him in, but I think the Kane injury probably offers me an opportunity to get him back. Certainly with all the players back together, Everton look like a real proposition again, whilst brings back the memories of the game week 3, game week 4 earlier in the season. But that Newcastle game looks particularly tasty, as you alluded to. You mentioned their poor defending. I was going to mention as well their dreadful attack. So they only 2 goals in the last 6 games. I remember watching the Sheffield United Newcastle game, and they just looked absolutely toothless. It's only really Callum Wilson who might be able to scramble a penalty out of nowhere to get any sort of attacking return, but the rest of the team look absolutely rubbish this season. So I'm actually quite a big fan of Luca Dean, who's also back, as was mentioned. So despite actually missing 8 games this season, he's still got 6 assists. So that's only Cresswell who's assisted more this season. And of course, we talked previously about his stats from last season. Only Trent created more chances as a defender, and this illustrates obviously his attacking talent. The likes of Dean and James Rodriguez being around to feed Calvert-Lewin. I certainly can see opportunities there for goals from Calvert-Lewin and assists, and perhaps a clean sheet as well, considering how poor Newcastle have been going forward.
Yep, one of the teams in the mud at the moment. But one of the teams on the up, in contrast, is Leicester, and we spoke about them last week a little bit. FPL Johnson says Everton and Leicester, as we just discussed, of course, are quite appealing at the moment. So what about Leicester? I guess our man FPL Crate Digger though sounds note of caution. He says, Vardy and Ndidi are out, so maybe we should think again. Nonetheless, FPL Stonks points out that Leeds up next, a juicy-looking opponent. So where are we with the Foxes? Anthony, are you looking at bringing either of them in?
Not particularly, to be honest. Looking at them, I guess it's no more than last week where we would have suggested that Madison and Barnes, or Harvey Barnes, that is, are probably the two best options there. And kind of any of the points that we mentioned last week about their potential, I think, still stand. That both of them are overperforming their XG and they look good on the eye, but aren't necessarily going to return hugely. Are they value for 7.2 and 6.8 million? Potentially, if they can kind of continue scoring at a rate just above their XG. And the Leeds game is exciting, but it is unfortunate that they're missing Vardy. I do kind of have questions about Leicester's creativity overall, and that does put me off. And there is, I guess, the third option there, Yuri Tilemo. He doesn't get enough shots on basically for me to be interested in him. And whilst he is a creative force, it's just not enough for me to take up one of my midfielder slots when it's so competitive. And then there's Iodi Perez, who is interesting and is playing as a centre forward at the moment with no Vardy, or has been up to now. But he didn't see much opportunities against Everton, and I don't think there's anything for me to be particularly excited about with him, even though we are, I guess, in terms of the calendar point of view, we are into the Iose Perez zone, but maybe in terms of what point of the season we're actually at because of COVID and the way the fixtures are, I don't think we're quite in the Iose Perez zone yet.
We've got another 10 game weeks.
Yeah, we have about 10 game weeks to get to the Iose Perez zone. So with that in mind, I'm giving them a miss, but I can totally see why people would want to bring them in. And of course, people have James Justin, and he's probably going to punish me again, but that's just every week at this point.
Oh, James Justin, he is the Nick Pope of this year for so many people. Like, as I said a few weeks ago, I think that's game week 8, game week 9, like the Leicester clean sheet is the one that I actively celebrate going every week. Sorry if you're a Justin owner. Yeah, I see. It's the same as being on the Nick Pope versus Nick Nope, that line, isn't it? It's exactly the same this year, where you're either a Justin fan or a Justin hater. And I think it's with Leicester that they did look okay against Everton, but I mean, Maddie's streak of a hot streak of scoring has ended. He, according to Brendan Rodgers, is also carrying a couple of injuries, which is also a bit worrying. Barnes got another assist, not quite as bad as the one last week. I think it was a legitimate one, but the stats are not particularly. I stand by as well my assertion that Barnes is a bit of a headless chicken. Maddison, the sort of player that you bring in on Sky, maybe, or if you were kind of going for 1 week punt versus Leeds, I definitely would bring in Maddison. But long term, I'm just not too sure I want anyone from Leicester right now. They're a really weird team to read, that's for sure. They're looking at their data. It's very hard to make sense of the profile. And that big change is mentioned by Crate Digger is that Ndidi went off and he'll be out for a little while. And I'm just hoping that means that James Justin concedes every week. Hopefully gets a red card. Maybe miss the penalty as well on the way. Just negative scores week by week would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, an own goal as well, please.
Own goal, misses a penalty and gets a red card because he's complaining about the fact he's missed a penalty. That would just be perfect. And if he got the red card rescinded, so he did it again and again and again, that would be brilliant. Anyway.
But I'd still like to see Leicester win because they're a very likeable team with all these things happening to Justin.
Victory for everybody but Justin. Right, Nick, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, we did actively celebrate, didn't we? The Justin yellow card, in our Slack group. That's been the biggest celebration seen in a while, which was quite crazy. But yeah. I've got a few regrets with him. Obviously, telling him on my wild card. Due to rumours that Pereira was going to be back the next week, which just never ever materialised. A bit of a joke, but I actually do like the Leicester assets. I think they're definitely options at the moment in the FPL. Just looking at the next 9 games, it looks like a fabulous run of fixtures, to be honest. I mean, Leeds, Fulham, Wolves, Liverpool's a tough one, but then it's Villa, Arsenal, Brighton, Sheffield United, Burnley. So you could put someone in and they can sit there for a long time if you do bring in a character like Justin, if you need to make changes in the defence, or Harvey Barnes or Maddison. And I'm still positive about Barnes. We had a long chat about him last pod, so I won't repeat those points too much. But I think certainly with Leeds and Fulham, I remember the hype around Spurs playing those games just because of the fact that Son can run in behind and get lots of goals, and we're all targeting Son and Kane for those particular fixtures. I think Leicester potentially should be targeted for those fixtures as well. And, I don't think Barnes is a headless chicken on autopilot running to the end of the pitch like Forrest Gump. I think he's definitely got a lot of potential. Picked up a cheeky assist this week, as you mentioned, Tom, even though you implied that it was a poor assist. It was a proper assist.
The week before was a bad assist. That was a total shithouse assist, that one. This week was a legit assist. I accept
this was a legit assist. And yeah, 6.8 million, pretty cheap. 42 goal attempts, 45.8% shot accuracy. So he's an accurate shooter, better than the likes of Bruno. So yeah, I think he's actually quite an interesting differential punt if you are looking for a mid-price mid.
Yeah, if you want a mid-price miss who's going to do daisy cutters into the keeper's arms, then brilliant. But yeah, no, definitely the next game, at least for Leeds, is a good 1 week punt for Leicester, and Leicester are, of course, travelling along very, very well. Final question this week: City defence armband. So FPL Quokka and FPL Awesemo ask if City defenders are serious captaincy propositions for this week. Obviously, that's predicated by the fact that last week, Mr. Cancelo, 17 points, 34. Cancelo did his goal did come when no one was really paying attention anymore. But yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that he was threatening to do for a long time, and the likes of Anthony did bring him in and were richly rewarded last week. So
I held him when you were selling him that time for Kyle Walker.
Oh God, you've had him for that long.
Yeah, it's been a long-term investment.
So you've been.
I got screwed over once, basically, the double game week when Stones went and race. Yeah,
well, you made up for it, didn't you? What do you think about captaining him then, Anthony? Would you ever be in the market for doing that?
I think it's definitely easier to say yes now after what we saw the other day, but that is something that we thought could happen for the longest time. And I think when you look at City's underlying data, let's say the last 6 games, my favorite time horizon, shots in the box, that nobody has conceded less on a per game basis. They've only conceded 2 big chances in the last 6. 2 TWO. And like Sheffield United that they're playing aren't exactly great. 4 goals in the last 6 on a per game basis. They'd be 14th for shots, 14th for XG, 13th for shots in the box. Who's worse? You might ask. Fulham, Southampton, Everton, Crystal Palace, and Newcastle have less XG than them in that time, which I thought was quite interesting. I'd have thought that Sheffield United were a little lower than that still, but no. Now, do I think I want to captain one of them? And that is the problem, is that I do feel like we've had 2 truly remarkable weeks for City defenders. And I don't necessarily think that even if we can continue to expect their defense to be brilliant, we can't continue to expect them to be getting double figures. And captaining the right City defender, I think, is going to become as big of a challenge as actually having the stones to captain them in the first place. And so with that in mind, I think it would... yes, someone got it. Thank you. That I do think that with that in mind, I think I'm going to still be a little bit vanilla and probably captain maybe Gundogan actually this week, just to have a City player captain. Although there are maybe other options out there as well. But look, overall, basically, do I think I'd captain a City defender? I think it's not a bad idea, but I'm maybe still a bit too boring to do it.
Cool. Nick, what do you reckon? I guess both questions there. Anthony has given perhaps his captaincy pick as well as the City defender sort of idea. What do you think to both questions? Would you captain City defender, and who are you captaining?
So I think if you owned Cancelo, he'd probably be the more exciting captain pick to go for. Obviously, we talked about B&M, Matt having that success this particular week. Good chance of further successes with Cancelo. Definitely with Sheffield United at home, the clean sheet looks pretty nailed. I think Diaz and Stones, you'd just be hoping for a Buenos Dias, wouldn't you? If in a cheeky goal or something like that, ultimately. So, it's not going to happen probably. I mean, we're not going to see another John Stones brace anytime soon, I don't think. So I'm not inclined to captain one of those guys myself, because ultimately you're just watching for corners all the entire game and hoping that, Ray and Brewster doesn't finally turn up with a goal. So it's not for me. I think Cancelo perhaps looks like an interesting differential pick. there's not really many other captain picks out there. And usually, as you said, the premiums aren't performing. So I look at my team. Harry Kane was going to be my captain, but now he's injured. So I've got some decisions to make there. I started thinking actually I could go for Sterling perhaps, but I've got I'm a bit anxious that he's going to miss out. And he's going to come off the bench and get 1 point captain. So that makes me very anxious. So I could even go for Salah, even though he obviously, as we mentioned many times, he hasn't scored in 6 weeks or so. He did score tonight. It was very unfortunate that in the build-up, Firmino handballed it. So that wasn't Salah's fault. So he did actually put the ball in the back of the net, and he could deliver against West Ham. So maybe I'll just go with him.
No, that certainly makes sense. I'm probably in the same boat. I captain Sterling of value and just take the risk there because the ownership is so low that you might as well go with it. I mean, it's a split pin game week, and it looks like with Kane out the picture as well, it's going to be Son. The majority, I guess, people will be on Son. Most of the algos will go with Son. It's probably a reluctant Son almost. So there's definitely room for a captain slightly off the beaten path. In terms of the City defenders, I agree with what you guys have said. Basically, Cancelo would be the one you would captain. Stones and Diaz. The ceiling is probably 9. A clean free bonus. That's probably what you'd be expecting from them. Maybe Diaz is due, but I don't think that's going to happen. You'll probably find lots of salty Ruben owners. If you do captain him, doesn't get anything. I think in terms of my captain this week, I'm really looking at Dominic Calvert-Lewin as due to the numbers that I've mentioned. I liked looking at the data for Crystal Palace last week and then electing to play Soucek over Holding, and that working out really well. And I would kind of think that may well work out again because Newcastle looks so atrocious, and with everybody now behind Calvert-Lewin, it's only a matter of time until he scores again. So like Gameweek 11, his last goal, obviously there is a gambler's element to that, but yeah, it's home, it's Newcastle, who are floundering. It could really be if he gets his brace, that's great for the week. I guess the lack of a clear captaincy pick does mean that it is a week to be doing a player like that. The only drawback is that it's the first game of the game week. So if he does screw up, then that's my entire weekend ruined, or my entire weekend at least off Twitter, ignoring the fact that FPL goes on and being very, very interested in the women that I live with, who I occasionally speak to on weekends. Transfers then. You've all heard our captains. Anthony, what are you doing in terms of the transfer market?
So I'm between two options, really. One of those is the aforementioned DCL, who it's a team structure thing for me that I kind of have a very kind of obvious first 10 players that I'd be playing and then a not very certain 11th player. And I could make that much easier for myself if I brought in DCL for Brewster. Although I could say the same, but it would probably mean selling the likes of Soucek or something. And I could actually bring in Son for them such that I have so much money in the bank after selling KDB for Gundogan. So it's one of those two options. I may even captain one of those players if I do bring them in the end, but I'm kind of sitting on it. I'm just not 100% certain what I want to do. And I might like to have 2 free transfers there going forward. I think more likely than not, I will upgrade Brewster to DCL because it's just does the least disruption and has the less chances of regret involved in it. At that point, then I'll be in a tough bind whether to captain him over Gundogan. But I think law of averages says I'll probably go with DCL if I bring him in.
Yeah, for me, the Kane move, the Kane injury has really disrupted my plans. So it probably is going to be another hit. Unfortunately, he's going to have to be sacrificed. And I've been weighing up a few ideas just in the last couple of hours. I've kind of whittled it down to 2 ideas. So one's going to be Kane and Bissouma leaving for Grealish and Calvert-Lewin, sort of going back to sort of game week 5 wildcard times, better times for me, having those guys. I think I had them for about 6 weeks in a row, smashing it and doing very well. So I could go back to that. The other alternative is to get in Son for Bissouma and move Kane on for Watkins. So couple of ideas there. It's one of those where I really can't decide which one's best. I'm going to have a little bit of a think about it. But unfortunately, I think Kane's injury means that Shea Adams gets a stay of execution in my team and stays a little bit longer because I can't do anything otherwise. I mean, I could potentially do Kane and Adams to to Watkins and Calvert-Lewin. That's another option, perhaps.
That looks really good. That's a really good move.
Yeah, then I can't get in Son, but yeah.
I mean, they've got City, haven't they, in 2 weeks? So you could potentially spin it that way and just be like, well, I'll leave it without Kane, see how they do, and then bring in Son in 2 weeks. Take a hit. 6 points between you and Anthony. How are you going to feel if Anthony overtakes you after being 40, 50 points ahead of him?
100.
100? Jeez.
That's a long season.
I was saying that from about game week 3. Yeah, it has been a long one.
Interesting. All right, so I'm going to do Vardy to Calvert-Lewin. Pretty set in stone. The other one I'm looking at doing is maybe Soucek to Son as well. I know Soucek, 15 points. Yeah. We will see. It might be worth it. Like, I trust Son to score more regularly than Soucek, and it saves me a transfer going forward. And also, it's just the ultimate arse cover to bring him in, isn't it, really? Because I'm going to be, flinching whenever Spurs play, and I don't own Son. And if there's no Kane, then Son's the guy. There's no 50-50 about that. Just might as well have him in and cover that downside. I'm sure he'll bring back that -4 over time. And as I mentioned a second ago, I think if I do buy Calvert-Lewin along with Anthony, I'll probably be captaining him. I'm tempted to chance my arm because it can't get any worse, to be honest. And that's it this week.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, we were Who Got the Assist. Thanks so much, as always, for listening. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks so much for listening, guys. whogottheassist@gmail.com if you want to send on some correspondence. In the meantime, there's only 24 hours shelf life in this pod, so we're going to release Tom to get editing and get this up as soon as he can. But in the meantime, you will hear us again on Sunday night after this weekend gets another round of Premier League matches finished with.
Yes, more night shifts for me. Hooray! In the meantime, I hope you think about whether you should bench your cheaper assets in fantasy football. Good luck on the weekend, and we'll speak to you on Monday.
Sloan.
Bye.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?